Victoria. Tell me a little bit about yourself and how you got interested in space.
Yeah. It was my grandfather's fault up above our heads, how these things came about and all the things that we couldn't see and how they were working. But I always thought that I wasn't smart to do physics and to do astronomy. So I went on other paths. Like I became a beauty therapist, I became a journalist. So I have a degree and several other qualifications that have nothing to do with astronomy. And finally,
Hmm.
I got the courage when I was 30 to start and study physics. And then eventually, I just went on to study astronomy and planetary science. And it turns out that I am smart enough to do it.
So, where did you study physics and planetary science?
I did a year and a half at university studying physics in Hungary, in my
Okay.
hometown, Szeged. And I'm doing astronomy and planetary science now. I just finished second year at the Open University.
So, were you a sci-fi nerd?
Not a nerd. I always enjoyed sci-fi movies, but I was always interested in astronomy, but I thought that I would be a singer or that I was a girly girl. So
Uh-huh.
I wasn't a sci-fi nerd, but I enjoyed it.
And how many people do you know in your kind of friendship group that are into space and thinking about space in the same way that you do?
One. I know one.
Yeah,
One person, and
yeah.
I met him when I was doing my physics degree back in Hungary, which I didn't finish, but he did. So he became a physicist, and
Uh-huh.
obviously he's interested in everything to do with space.
So tell us a little bit about what you're doing at the moment in terms of your journalism and your writing and your thinking and adventures in.
I have to thank COVID for my current career. So I was a beauty therapist when COVID, and at that point I finished my physics degree in Hungary. I moved back to Scotland, and I wasn't really sure what was going to happen. So COVID hit. I was sitting at home. I was very bored. I don't like doing anything, but I couldn't work. So I was browsing the internet and I came across the Open University and I just started studying astronomy and planetary science. And because of COVID, there were a lot of conferences that were online. And I started attending all these online conferences, web talks, webinars, and everything. And I just got so excited about them. And I was thinking to myself that, oh, I have a journalism degree, which I never used. So why don't I
Mhm.
start writing articles about these events? And that's how it started. I started writing articles for free about the events and about the talks that I heard. I was very into space medicine, space psychology. I wrote a few articles about that. And eventually it all became to be a job. I landed
Mhm.
myself a job with Spacewatch Global, which is an online space magazine. I write for them constantly, and obviously, I meet people. You do networking at these events and when you do interviews. And I landed myself more and more jobs. So now I work for a communications company who works with ESA as well. I'm everywhere now.
Awesome. Have you had the opportunity to get to any of the physical conferences since the kind of COVID restrictions have stopped?
Not yet. The first one will be the International Astronautical, I think, conference. That's in Paris in September. I can't remember the name of it, but yeah. So in September, I'm gonna go, and it's a 5-day conference in Paris.
It is quite interesting when you start researching the amount of activity online and physical
Loads.
conferences and lots of things going on. It's huge, absolutely huge.
Loads. I didn't know how many things were happening in space, like until I started writing about rocket launches, and now I'm really interested in rockets. So I started a YouTube channel about rockets, and I didn't know how many rocket launches there were, and people don't know about these things. Like when I say that I'm a space journalist, people look at what's happening in space, nothing's happening there. I'm like, oh my God, you can't even
Yeah.
imagine. And yeah, if you're not interested, it's not very well communicated, I think.
I think that it gets very technical very quickly. But I think if you dig a little bit deeper into what does this really mean and what's the impact of these things, then it gets quite interesting. That's the part I'm really interested in. Not so much the engineering, more so, well, what's the outcome of
Yeah,
the engineering and what's that mean for us?
I just wanted to say that I'm really interested in space medicine and space psychology, as I said. What happens to humans in space? And I think that's something that could be understood by everyone. It's not too technical, and I think that's really interesting. But people don't know enough about that either. So I went to do a teach physics internship. It was 5 weeks last year. And I spoke to all these kids doing A-level physics, and they were interested in space. And I I just spoke to them about what happens to the human body in microgravity for 55 minutes, and they had no idea, and they were fascinated. And so I think these things should be maybe taught at school, or I don't know, there should be some extracurricular activity they could do, or I don't know. But people should know about these things because they're fascinating, and a lot of solutions that we come up with in space obviously can be utilized in on Earth as well.
I'm interested in the space psychology aspect that you were just talking about there. Well, would you just explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, so a lot of things happen to the human body, and you have to come to terms with it. But if you just think about the very simple fact that you can't just sleep in microgravity, just lying down, you're strapped down. So you have to come to terms with that. You have to come to terms with seeing 17 sunrises, like when you're on the ISS. You don't really have that day and night. It's one day is 1.5 hours, I think, and then there's a sunrise. A lot of things happen physically to your body that you have to accept. Then, if we're talking about deep space travel, then there's the fact of having access to no medication, because most medicine lose their so they expire within half a year because of cosmic radiation. They can't really do anything with medicine. The fact that there's no one to save you, you can't just open a window if you need fresh air. All these things have a profound effect on you. And also, when you just try to hug in microgravity, just hug someone, just to feel that, oh, there's a human being, and that's the body that you're hugging doesn't have weight. So these are very simple things that we take for granted, but they don't exist in space. It's just, yeah. So I want to go into research on how these things affect people's behaviors and brain and thinking, and obviously the emotional.
What do you see as the sort of the Earth applications of that sort of research? Obviously, there's some interesting and useful and valuable and necessary understanding that needs to happen for space travel, but what's the use of that back on Earth?
I think it will give us more understanding to how our brain works and how it can adapt to different situations. I'm sure there will be applications. I don't know what exactly,
Mhm.
but we not just started. It's been going on for a few years now, but we're working, well, not me, but experts are working on hibernation as well, and deep space travel. So I'm sure that the psychological that will present themselves in space and how we resolve those will be useful on Earth.
I'm certain there's lots of different understandings that are exacerbated in space that when you extrapolate them back down to Earth and kind of roll them out into healthcare and mental health care, then there'll be lots and lots of learnings that we can take from the space programs. Space.
Definitely, and things and they're in isolation in space. So any kind of mental health problems related to isolation, I think these are good experiments, because astronauts are basically subjects to experiments which can help us resolve these issues on Earth as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, do you expect to get into space yourself?
No, I don't. No, I don't think I can do. I would love to do it. I'm also scared. I think space is fantastic, but it also scares me a lot. And there's a lot of scary things about space, but I think the worst thing for me is that there's no sound, because there's no atmosphere, so there's no sound.
So,
Really scary for me. Yeah, and you can't hear anything either. So there's just no sound, and I can't wrap my head around that.
yeah.
No, but I would like to help people to go on and discover.
So I don't expect to go into space either, but I think my children might go into space. I think there's an opportunity that they may go into space. And I certainly think my grandchildren, who haven't been born yet, there's a reasonable chance they're going to go into space. And that's the interesting thing, to just expand our horizons, time horizons a little bit, and think 50, 100 years ahead. Yeah, it's reasonable to think in 100 years that there will be some space colonies. So in your world, what's the new news? What's the latest thing that you've seen that you thought, that's an interesting development?
No, as I said, I'm excited about rockets. I think, I don't even know. There's so many developments. If you look at rockets propulsion, there's constantly a lot of improvements and a lot of new things coming along. Almost every month, there's some innovation. So I think it's one of the fastest industries in terms of development and innovation. I would say rockets, obviously satellites are getting smaller and smaller, which is good in a way, not so good because they send up constellations, but that's another story, space sustainability. I also saw a lot of articles about moon bases. Obviously, China and Russia want to build their own. The US has its idea again, and it's getting more commercial up there. So I'm excited about that as well, because there's going to be a lot of competition, and I think there's going to be a lot of fantastic things and innovation. But again, it would be very scary for me to go to the moon and just see Earth and everyone I know back there and not being able to reach it as well.
I do think that there's an interesting opportunity for more collaboration between the spacefaring nations. What's the next thing for you? What's the next project? Finish your degree, and are you interested in moving more into the medical science field?
I think I'm too old to start to study medicine now, but I would definitely do a master's degree in psychology and, go into psychology that way. About rockets more, but I'm not the engineer type, so that's more of a hobby. Of stars, I can see myself doing astronomy research in that area.
Well, it's been lovely to chat with you for a few minutes today. Thanks so much for your time, and I look forward to speaking with you again in the future.